Hello YouTube and Facebook. How are y'all doing today? Sorry I was having problems getting YouTube up, but I think we're going. Let me push the record button. So, how are y'all today? Hope everybody's doing good. Are y'all ready to study Esther? And if y'all would send me some messages, maybe on the Restoration Messenger site, let me know we're up and we're good. But we're going to go ahead and get started. I hope you have your Bibles. I hope you have your paper, a notebook, and pens. Primarily, we're going to be in the notebooks and pens today. We won't really start with the book of Esther until next week because we're going to do some background stuff today. First of all, one thing I want to... One thing I wanted to say was that the book of Esther, of course, is a historical book. But we will not just be looking at it from an historical perspective, but we will also be looking at it from a prophetic perspective. And so as we get further and further into the book, you'll find out what I mean by that. But just be prepared that we will be talking about it from a prophetic perspective as well as a historical perspective. Okay, so when was the book of Esther written? The book of Esther was written somewhere between 470 and 430 BC. It's one of the last books written in the Old Testament, or what we in Messianic life call the Tanakh. It's part of the writings within the Tanakh, the Ketuvim. And so it was written, like I said, between 470 and 430 BC. It was either written right at the end of Xerxes' reign or in the reign of his son, Artaxerxes. Now, I just use the name Xerxes. A lot of your translations will use the name Ahasuerus. I gotta look at it to say it. You believe that? Ahasuerus is how the Complete Jewish Bible says it. Historians have pretty much agreed that that is Xerxes. So I'm just going to be using Xerxes because that's a lot easier for me to say. So if that offends someone, I'm really, really sorry. I hope you can forgive me, but it is a lot easier for me to say. And so we are going to be looking at this book of Esther as written between 465 to 424 BC, between 470 to 430 BC. Artaxerxes' reign was from 465 to 424 BC. I gotta get this straight. I've got some PowerPoint for you in a little bit because we're going to dive deep into a certain subject here today. But I just wanted to give us a little bit of introduction, a little bit of background first. This book introduces us to the first festival that the Jewish people started to celebrate other than the ones listed in Leviticus chapter 26. Purim comes 1,000 years after the original ones were given in Leviticus 23. So keep that in mind. It took them 1,000 years to go, you know what, this is such a significant event that we want to remember it. We want our children to remember it. And so we're going to honor this with a holiday. Now, obviously, this is not a quote-unquote feast of the Lord, but it is a holiday that honors what God did for his people. Saving an entire people is worthy of honor, and that's exactly what our God did in this book and through this account of Esther, through her and through Mordecai. All right, so I also wanted to mention real quick Hanukkah. Hanukkah came about 100 years later after Purim. It is not mentioned in the Old Testament or the Tanakh. it is prophesied about. Okay, Charity, where are you looking? Sorry, I've got someone telling me she can't find it. It's on the Restoration Fellowship page on YouTube. It's also on the, it should be on the Esther's Legacy Facebook page. Okay, if you're not getting it now, I am recording it, and so you might be able to pick that up later. Okay, I think Regina's going to catch us later. So let's move on to the idea of Hanukkah in terms of it not being in the Tanakh, but it is mentioned in the New Testament in John chapter 10, verse 22. In John chapter 10, verse 22, Yeshua actually goes to Hanukkah. That feast of dedication is Hanukkah. It's the word Hanukkah in Hebrew. That word literally means dedication. So in John, they just translated the idea of the word Hanukkah instead of transliterating it like they do a lot of times with other things, like with Passover, for example. All right. So we have Xerxes. Xerxes is a historical figure. He was a king of Persia. He is most known for his involvement in the Greek-Persian War, where he attacks Greece. If you remember, it was Xerxes who was king of Persia, who was leading the attack against the Greeks when the 300 Spartans held him off for a while. And so that is Xerxes. He's the one that went to fight in Greece. The other accounts we have of this story that's written in Esther is, of course, the book of Esther itself, but it's also the Greek historian Herodotus. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote his histories between 431 and 425 BC. And so that is shortly after the time period of these events, and it is within the reign of Artaxerxes, Xerxes' son. And so some of the things that we learn from Herodotus from a secular perspective about Xerxes that would have happened in the time of his reign was the fact that he did participate in the Greek-Persian War. We also learn about his affairs before he met Esther, what was going on in his life, some of the people in his life. We also see from Herodotus the fact that he allowed others to rule for him. In other words, he had prime ministers such as Haman and Mordecai. Okay, that fits right along with what Scripture tells us in this book. Also, the most interesting thing about what Herodotus has to say about Xerxes is that when he comes back from the war, he gets involved in the intrigues of the harem. That should sound very familiar to us if we are familiar with the book of Esther itself. He gets very involved in the intrigues of his harem, and he chooses a wife from his harem, as a matter of fact. So that is something that Herodotus lets us know in terms of him getting involved in the intrigues of his harem. I am getting beeps all over the place. Do y'all hear them? Hopefully. All right, Charity found us. Very good. Hello, Charity. I'm glad you're here as we study the book of Esther. So get out your notebook and your pen. Let's go. All right. So I am going to kind of take for granted for a minute that most of us are familiar with the story of Esther a little bit, but also the background of Esther and her family and how they got to Persia. Remember, it was King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon who went in and destroyed Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, but he also took captives, and he took them to Babylon and other provinces that Babylon controlled. And so that is how Esther and her family gets over in the east, over in Persia. They're taken away by King Nebuchadnezzar. When Cyrus the Great, the king of Persia, conquers Babylon, he allows for the peoples that Babylon had captured to go home, to their homes. And that included the Jews. So he allows the Jews to go back to Israel. So one thing we need to keep in mind is at the same time that the events of Esther are taking place, there are Jews back in Israel. And that Israel is a province of Persia. That's a very important thing to remember. One thing also is the fact that, of course, Esther is adopted by her cousin Mordecai. But as you know, we will get into that in the book. So that's kind of Esther's background. But as you've read the book of Esther, have you ever wondered, okay, we know how Esther and her family got to Persia. We know why they're there. It was because of King Nebuchadnezzar and the conquering of Judah that God allowed. But what is the history of Xerxes? What is his past? Who is this person? That is exactly what we're going to cover today. When the readers of Esther first read this book, they were very familiar with the kingdom of Persia, with its rulers, with Xerxes, with his family. They were very familiar with how Esther and her family got to Persia. So they're familiar with everything. What the book of Esther, is allowing us to know, if we would have been some of those first readers, was what was going on behind the scenes in terms of what God was doing to save the Jews. Now, of course, God himself is never mentioned in the book of Esther, but he is all over the book of Esther. He is the one that is manipulating everything, so to speak, from behind the scenes to get things just the way he wants them in order for his people to be saved from the plots of Haman. And so the book of Esther was letting those first-time readers know the palace intrigues, so to speak, behind what was going on through those events, because they would have known all this other stuff. So we know the story of Esther and her family. We're somewhat familiar with the book of Esther. We're going to become more familiar with the book of Esther in the weeks ahead, I hope. But we know very, very little about the kings of Persia and how that leads up to Xerxes and his time as king of Persia. And so today what we're going to do is I want to take a look at the history of Persia, because it is very important that we understand exactly where Xerxes was coming from. Because believe it or not, we're going to refer back to his history and his family history time and time again as we read this book, because it definitely plays in to the accounts that happen. It's going to make some obscure statements in the book all of a sudden make sense. Sentences like, out of nowhere, that Esther found favor with everyone that knew her or that came across her. What exactly is that referring to? Because I do believe, based on Xerxes' family past, that it is referring to actually a specific individual, actually. So we will get into that as we go along. But there are statements like that in the book that don't make sense unless you know who he is and know his family history. So let's begin, shall we? I'm going to transition. I'm going to pull up some slides here. You'll see some names, right? Some names that are not easy to pronounce. I'm going to try my best to pronounce them for you. Okay, so first of all, we have Achaemenes of Anshan. He lived about 700 BC. This is the person whom this particular dynasty of Persia is named after, the Achaemenid dynasty. It is named after him. He fathered a son by the name of Cyrus of Anshan. He's important because he is the last ancestor that is shared by two important kings of Persia. Okay? Now, Cyrus of Anshan, when he died, he divided his territory and he gave his two sons different territory. To Cyrus the First, he gave Anshan, which is farther to the south by the Gulf of Persia. And he gave Armenes the territory of Persia, which is more the territory of Elam. It's to the north of Anshan, but both of them are both right on the east coast of the Persian Gulf before you get to the mountains. Okay, that's important because right on the other side of those mountains, to the northeast of those mountains, is the plateau and the territory of Medea, or where the Medes live, which will play an important part of our story. Okay, because if you remember in Scripture, the Persian Empire was the Medo-Persian Empire. And so when we see that Anshan and Persia are given to two different sons, we need to know that they are on the west side of the mountains. Medea is on the northeast side of the mountains. Okay? So let's look at Cyrus the First. He has a son by the name of Cambius the First, who fathers a son by the name of Cyrus. This is Cyrus the Second, as you can imagine, but he is known to history as Cyrus the Great. This is the one who told the Jews they could go home. Okay, and we'll get a little bit more into his history in just a second. Let's jump over to where it talks about Armenes of Persia. He fathers a son by the name of Arsames, who fathers a son by the name of Hystaspes. These names are not easy. They're not easy. Okay. And his son is Darius the Great. So you will notice that Darius is not a direct descendant of Cyrus the Great. Matter of fact, you have to go all the way back to Hystaspes to get their last common ancestor. They are distant cousins, but they both come from the Achaemenid line. Okay? That's very important. One is the Anshan line and one is the Persian line. Okay? All right. Moving along. Let's look at the kings of Medea, or the Medes. Okay, remember I said that's on the northeast side of the mountains. And so there's a mountain range between Anshan and Persia, a little bit to the north, and Medea. There's a mountain range between them. All right, so who is the king of Medea? His name is, I'm going to try to say this, Astyages, otherwise also known to history as Xerxes. Okay, so there was another Xerxes before our Xerxes in the book of Esther. Matter of fact, it's the Xerxes, is the person he's named after. Okay, so he's named after the king of Medea. Well, why would kings of Persia name their child after the kings of Medea? Well, there's a reason for that, and we'll see in just a minute what that is. So Xerxes, this Xerxes, has a son by the name of Darius. This is Darius the Mede. This Darius is the Darius we see in the book of Daniel. This is the Darius that puts Daniel in the lion's den. If you remember in the book of Daniel, it says that Darius the Mede is made king. Okay? He's made king. He doesn't become king. And so Darius the Mede is actually made king of the Babylonian province by Cyrus the Great. Okay? So this is that Darius. Xerxes has a daughter by the name of Mundane. Okay? Mundane. Darius has 2 children. Darius the Mede's son is Otanes. His daughter is Cassandane. Okay? Both Mundane and Cassandane are going to play very important roles in just a few minutes, as well as Otanes. So these 3 children play a very important role. Darius the Mede stays the king of the Babylonian province for only a couple of years before he dies. So he's kind of in and out of the picture fairly quickly. Okay? All right. So Persia and Medea come together. All right? Now, how does that happen? Cambyses the first, if you remember, let me go back here. Cambyses the first was the son of Cyrus the first of Anson, who's the father of Cyrus the Great. Okay, so that's Cambyses. He marries Mundane. Okay, and they have Cyrus. So, Darius the Mede's sister, Mundane, is Cyrus the Great's mother. So when he puts Darius the Mede in charge of the Babylonian province, he's putting his uncle in charge of that province. Got that? Okay. So Cambyses marries Mundane, and they have Cyrus the Great. Cyrus brings Anson and Persia together, and then he does something very interesting. He goes up to Medea and conquers the land of his grandfather. He goes and he takes Medea, the land of his mother. Okay? We also know from history that eventually some of the kings are also going to go, well, Cyrus actually goes to Lydia in modern-day Turkey and takes that territory. That's how Persia gets that territory. Cyrus takes it because his father's mother was actually from Lydia. So it's really interesting. Their family dynamics play a very important part in the dynamics of whether or not they take a territory, it seems, at least at first. You know what? I'm just noticing that my head is kind of bobbing into this, so I'm going to try to move this over a little bit. Is that making it worse or better? Okay, I think that's better. Okay. And I'm saying a lot. I'm so sorry. I will try to stop doing that because I'm very aware of it when it happens, and I don't like it. All right. So Cyrus takes Medea, and he takes Medea in 550 BC, 9 years after he becomes king of Persia. Okay? When he becomes king of Medea as well, he is crowned by his cousin Cassandane. Remember her? The daughter of his uncle Darius the Mede. He is not only crowned by Cassandane, he marries her. Okay? So whoops, I went too far. He marries Cassandane. And they have 4 children. All right? Those 4 children are Cambyses the second, Smerdis, Atosa, their oldest daughter, and Artistone, their youngest daughter. So they had 2 sons and 2 daughters. Cambius II marries his sister Atosa. This is very important. He marries his sister Atosa, and they have no children. Cambius is on the throne for about 8 years. Before leaving on a campaign down into Egypt, he secretly, that word's very important, he secretly kills his brother Smerdis. Everybody got that? He secretly kills his brother Smerdis. So no one knows that Smerdis is dead. Well, on his way back from the campaign, Cambius II dies. Now here's where it gets really interesting. We have our first conspiracy, so to speak. Because naturally the throne would have went to Smerdis, his brother, because him and Atosa have no children. But Smerdis is dead, but nobody knows Smerdis is dead. So a look-alike of Smerdis's by the name of Gamata, which is spelled G-A-U-M-A-T-A, G-A-U-M-A-T-A, Gamata actually takes the throne, pretending to be Smerdis. They got that? So he takes the throne, pretending to be Smerdis after Cambius' death. To solidify his position as Smerdis, as king, he marries Atosa. That's interesting. He solidifies his right to the throne by marrying the queen. He also married another widow of Cambius by the name of Phidemia. We'll see her name in just a minute because she's the daughter of Otanes. Okay? Here's the deal. Gamata, the fake Smerdis, is afraid of Atosa. Atosa knows who he is not. She knows it's not the real Smerdis. And so he's afraid of her because she's also the most powerful woman in the kingdom. Atosa is known for having her court of the women. She's very, very powerful in the kingdom. She's the daughter of Cyrus, the oldest daughter of Cyrus the Great, the wife of Cambius II, queen of Persia. She's being used to solidify the fake Smerdis' right to the throne against her will, as a matter of fact. He's so afraid of her that he puts her in the harem and locks her in the harem to keep her from getting word out that there is a fake Smerdis or an imposter on the throne. However, he is not afraid of the younger wife, Phidemia, the daughter of Otanes. And so he lets Phidemia come and go, so to speak. For those of you who are wondering how to spell her name, it is, like I said, we'll see it in just a minute, but I'll go ahead and spell it for you. P-H-A-E-D-Y-M-I-A. He's not afraid of her. And so he lets her come and go. And so she's able to get word out of the harem to her father Otanes that there's an imposter on the throne. Okay? Everybody got that? So now Otanes knows there's an imposter. Otanes is the son of Darius the Mede. Okay? His sister was Cyrus's, what was she? Otanes' sister, I gotta go back, I don't want to tell you wrong. Yeah, his sister is Cyrus's wife, right? Cassandane is Cyrus's wife. Yeah, Cambius is the second's mother. This gets a little confusing after a while, I know. That's why I made the slides. Okay? So I hope it helps. All right. So, let's see, where was I? The word gets out to Otanes that there's a conspirator. And so he gets 7 other people together. And so now we have our second conspiracy. And this second conspiracy involves 7 conspirators. And they decide to take things into their own hands and claim the throne of the kingdom. They're going to get away from this imposter. The 2 most powerful men of the 7 are Otanes and Darius, whom history knows as Darius the Great, the Persian. Darius the Persian. Okay? Darius, at the time, is 28 years old. He's a general in the military, and he is a direct descendant of the Achaemenid dynasty. Now they're from the Persian line. Remember? So he is actually more related to the kings of Persia than Otanes is, who's from the line of Medea. His family has married into the line of Persia, but he's from Medea. And these two groups do speak different languages, which is important to keep in mind as well. So Darius and Otanes and the 7 conspirators hatch this plot. They're going to kill Gamata, the fake Smyrtus. And they let Darius do the deed, because it's in doing the deed that Darius gets the throne. Okay? So killing the fake Smyrtus gets Darius the throne in 522 BC. So the fake Smyrtus is only on the throne for a few months, because Cambius II ruled from 530 BC to 522 BC. Okay? So he's only on the throne for a few months. He's killed by Darius, and Darius takes the throne. Here's the kicker. Okay? Darius is not a descendant of Cambius II. He is of the Achaemenid line, but he's not a descendant of Cambius II or Cyrus the Great. So how does he solidify his right to the throne? Well, it's important to know that when Darius comes to the throne, he's already married and he's already a father. I'm going to say that again because it's important. When Darius comes to the throne, he's already married and he's already a father. However, to solidify his right to the throne, he marries the most powerful woman in the kingdom. He marries Atoza. Okay? So Atoza, the daughter of Cyrus the Great, and Cassandane from Medea, was also the sister and wife of Cambius II, and wife to the fake Smyrtus. She agrees to marry Darius to get the throne away from any other kind of rumors about the fact that Darius killed the fake Smyrtus. Okay? So she agrees to marry him, to give him legitimacy on the throne. He also marries a number of others. He also marries Artistone, Atoza's younger sister. He marries, let me see if I can get to that slide. So there we go. He marries Atoza, he marries Artistone, he marries Parmis, the daughter of the real Smyrtus that was killed by his brother Cambius II. He marries Phidemia, the daughter of Otanes and widow of Cambius II, and Gamata, or the fake Smyrtus. And he marries the daughter of another co-conspirator, the daughter of Gobryas. Okay? So he marries 5 other women besides the one wife he already has. So he has 6 wives now. Only one can be queen. He gives that right to Atoza. Atoza remains queen of Persia. Got that? Okay. So Otanes is now the father-in-law of Darius. Okay. So he gives the title of queen